The clothes do not maketh the man. An older saying, and one to point out that a person's character is not defined by how they appear. The full quote from Arthur Ashe being, "Clothes and manners do not make the man, but when he is made, they greatly improve his appearance." But I have thought of it a few times recently for today's society, but an updated version in my mind. The clothes do not maketh a woman. And the same can be said of any appropriation, whether it be cultural or gender. On a personal level, I don't actually mind anyone wanting an external shell that they feel represents their internal self, as I've written before in my article, What Are We? And I guess even touched upon it in Perceptions of Self. And we are all part of society which is geared up towards expression of self and being unique. While we slowly have a severe lack of individualism creeping in though, it's all getting a bit weird. For many generations now, there have been men dressing as women and living as them. All sorts of relationships have been had, as well as women now and again passing for men and dressing as such in public too. Social history and rules also play into these, as without such expectations of gender and the role they play, we are led to believe that people would have had much more freedom to choose. I am not so sure, given that choice is sometimes part of the problem, and if you are making a decision without all the information and lack of forethought, then is it really a choice? What we have now is almost like someone saying, "Here, you can have Pandora's box." "Oh, you haven't heard of Pandora? No matter, have it anyway, it'll be fine." It may well be just a box, but what comes with it is not. I did a small piece called Pandora's Asylum for a closer look at that story, but I can't help thinking that a can of worms has been opened, and only time will tell the ugly truth of it all, with people caught in the middle of it, as does always happen. So, the problem appears to be multi-layered and is causing very real issues, because as with most situations, if there is an advantage to gain for an opportunist, they will jump upon it, which is why I believe we have issues surrounding prisons, women's units, hospitals, schools, changing rooms, toilets, etc. They all have something in common as places. You either find vulnerable people there, or people at a vulnerable moment in their lives. That is not an accident these places are being used as a hunting ground. Same with where you used to know paedophiles would try to gain access to children. Schools, playgroups, care system, youth clubs, youth sports, scouts, etc. Now you have online too. But that does not mean that the physical approach has diminished in any way, and opportunists will try and find a way to get to what they want. They are schemers and always on the lookout, so would have understood the implications of a change in attitude in society, and how that would create its own opportunity. And you must understand, we are talking about people of a severe sexual deviance and mental dysfunction, who were always like that, and have just found a way to try and blend in, and allowing their behaviour to flourish. Ironically, it's by standing out, which for some reason now makes you immune to consequence in many cases. And people either being shouted down or called names because they try to highlight very real concerns is a warning in itself. People who look to abuse others often have a charming streak and will have others on their side in advance of any revelations, ready to discredit or dismiss any accusations that may come their way. But what of the ones who are rumbled before they even get to their goal? The ones who aren't so charming and make it obvious there is something very disturbing about them. It seems they can be spotted, but without any action, just a feeling. Sometimes you just know when something isn't right. Your internal spidey senses start going off, so you know, and no one else telling you otherwise will change that. Because when you think of it, how many people thought Jimmy Savile was great? In fact, nearly every high-profile person validated him, his outrageous behaviour, his garish clothes and demeanour. All part of the act to make that type of person acceptable. In the public's eyes at least. And when it came out and the shock subsided, turns out many knew and were silenced, or it was covered up. So just because celebrities in the media want you to override your own instincts and believe what they say over what you see and feel, may not be the best road to follow. Imitate to infiltrate. That should be a phrase to remember. They will try to be like you to get at you. That applies to all sorts of situations and people, and it's always been the way that we have to work out people's intentions, as they aren't always forthcoming with them, or they're honest ones. Unfortunately, there are some very caring and trusting people out there, who are often the ones who fall victim of this type, because just as they exist, so does their opposite, the mean and callous people who are only out for themselves. Lots fall in between, knowing to not be too trusting, to check people out, trust your instincts, and so on. And it doesn't always mean dressing or looking like you. As we know from the list of above, those adults don't dress like children to gain access to them, or maybe in some cases they do, but they come down to their level on some point to gain trust from them, which in itself isn't the issue. It's what they then do with that trust that is the problem. Luring and baiting springs to mind too. If you want to catch a fish, you can't just sit there. You need a hook and some bait. That's where I think the drag hour story time problem comes into play, covered in Face of a Clown in Storytown. It's an odd thing to me to see the actual safety and decency disregarded for many, for the feelings of one. Whether they be male or female, whether they be vaccinated or unvaccinated, it seems to be a strange thing being encouraged. Ignore your own physical safety, instincts and feelings, and place those of someone else above yours, sometimes a complete stranger or unknown, of whom you have no knowledge of motive or intention, and who has no regard for you. You would do it, right? No, you wouldn't. And if you would, ask yourself why. But that is what appears to be happening. Lots of people being told how to feel when their own instincts and feelings are telling them perfectly well what is going on, yet is being dismissed. Possibly because some people are naive to different types of people and don't fully understand what is going on, unable to view the bigger picture. Or they don't want to be seen as different from the public attitude, the one being pushed in the media, so they conform to parroting the latest spin or acceptable thing, so they seem to be keeping up with the times. It's hard to know for sure. But it is a bit out of control, and is no longer about some people wanting to seamlessly blend into society as themselves. Publicly, it's turned into something quite exposed and ugly, and is about parading a certain aspect of someone's life in sometimes quite a grotesque display, out there for everyone to be made aware of. But to do that, they aren't just being themselves, are they? They are taking something away from someone else, and it didn't appear to start that way. Men in women's sports, jobs, politics, and so on. We now have boys and men who decide they are female, taking medals, funding, placements, jobs away from actual women. And if people think this isn't a problem, I do wonder why. Because if women weren't at such a disadvantage for so many years, why would we even need our own spaces, and categories, and groups? There was a reason for that. Men have been openly favoured over women in many situations, jobs, in many religions, households, and so on. So it really is an extra insult to have men still being put a cut above. But this time they are dressing like women, and taking on what they believe are traits of a woman, I guess. I only have a few examples to go on. Recently the US put some real gems out there, using two men who say they are women to discuss women's beauty products and healthcare. It was over-exaggerated, camp, and extremely cringy. Everything you would expect from a pre-scripted acting role. Trying to make us believe that this is a representation of women, and people think it's great. It's really quite strange, because it's not just about men dressing, acting like, and living like a woman. It's got a very sinister, pharmaceutical underbelly that is really the ugly side of what they are doing. Because while they allow the media stories of grown men calling themselves women once they've been arrested for violent sexual crimes, they seem to sidestep the stories of what is happening to people on the ground. The ones who are encouraged to change themselves to be who they really are, but in some cases becoming neither who they were or thought they were, but something entirely new. I have to say, I was quite shocked to read about young teenage girls having mastectomies and the drugs they put children on to stop puberty, so they progress in the trans agenda. Shocked about what it does to the body, which I already knew goes through massive changes through the teenage years, mentally and physically. So to think that was being halted and subverted was heartbreaking, to be honest. and will have serious consequences, both mentally and physically, down the road. Add to that the pretty much guaranteed constant medication needed thereafter, to keep your hormones in line, I guess, and stop your body doing what it naturally should, suppressing normal functions, instincts, thoughts, in place of synthetically enhanced ones, but forever dependent on them and whoever dispenses them. Because to me, that's the real goal for them. The ones who pull the strings and set the agenda, who never before cared about our happiness or well-being, or ability to feel complete, unless it can make them money or give them power. So when all the departments follow suit, you know something is up. Employment, education, medicine, law enforcement, media, all branches of the network of society got on board at the same time to make this new thing suddenly acceptable and accessible. It's not new anymore, and has been going for quite some time. But it's only in recent years that I've started to see personal stories on social media of people going through it, and of the treatments and studies and medications, etc. Focusing mainly on how people must feel inside to go down that route, trying to work out the psychology of it. Then I noticed I was missing something, the glaringly obvious in fact. Who was making money off this? If it was being pushed to the mainstream, to adults and kids of all classes and ages, then there was money in it, or something else they stand to gain. Suddenly, education and healthcare had funding for it. It was everywhere. Gender studies, diversity, trans, etc. I could see there must be a lot of money to be made. But that particular one would continue to make them money, as they would have a customer for life. Because even if they changed their mind, or it went wrong, they would still need medication in most cases. Similar with the vaccine. If you had a reaction, then it seems an awful lot of medical care can be required, immediately and thereafter if you make it through. So it looks like a win-win all round for the pharma companies, and all those with shares and investments in them. No liability, maximum profit, forever. You can see why maybe anyone heading that might not want that gravy train to end. In fact, they just diversified their portfolio, so it looks to be with us for a while yet. Just remember the following industry saying, because we are all patients and customers to them, and it really does serve a profitable purpose for us to be sick and confused, and in need of mental or physical medical assistance. A patient cured is a customer lost.